With all the flops that we've seen from DC over the past several years, they were hoping that Blue Beetle would not be another failure. This would be the 7th financial failure in a row when it comes to these stories that are in line with the DCEU. Well, unfortunately for them, as much as they tried to establish some sort of blame on the weather, they had every excuse in the book for why Blue Beetle had one of the worst openings we've seen in history. Now that the second weekend is here and the spin is still in full force, it is impossible to ignore reality. And the reality is, this is another financial failure for Warner Brothers and for DC. Warner Brothers suffers worst ever DCEU superhero box office opening overseas. Between the domestic opening and the pathetic international opening, it only opened to about $43 million globally. It was absolutely pathetic. And now here we are in the second weekend. And as I said, as much as some people are trying to spin these numbers, these are not good numbers for Blue Beetle. That's it. Blue Beetle had the 5th best hold in DCU history at the box office with about a 50% drop. You hear that, you think, oh my gosh, that's incredible. One of the best holds in DCEU history, until you remember that this thing only made about $26 million its opening weekend. So when you look at the actual number involved, it's one of the worst second weekends we've ever seen. And the reason that the hold was 50%, unfortunately, is not because people just love Blue Beetle. They just couldn't wait to go out there. It probably has a lot more to do with the fact that it was National Theater Day, that they had big discounts and people flocked to the theaters to see almost everything. And ironically, Exhibitor Relations points this very thing out, that 49% hold for Blue Beetle would look good for a superhero flick, provided it opened big and wasn't in a marketplace where no other film in the top 5 dropped more than 29%. Ouch. Again. Look at some of these holds. Because they were running all these deals, because people flocked to the theaters during National Theater Day, National Cinema Day, look at this. Oppenheimer had a 16% hold. Barbie had a 19% hold. MI7, 24%. Meg 2, 25%. Even Ninja Turtles had a 29% drop. And Blue Beetle had one of the biggest drops of the weekend for anything. When you look at these numbers, people can try to spin it as much as they can, but the reality is that Blue Beetle has now passed about $80 million at the global box office. This is a movie with a little bit over $100 million production budget, if you take the very conservative estimates. And if you take the most conservative for the marketing estimates, somewhere between 50 and 75 million, this is a movie that needs to make somewhere around 300 million to maybe even up to 400, depending on what these final tallies are, just to break even. And even in these articles that are trying to do their best to spin this second weekend for Blue Beetle, they're acknowledging that it's now on pace to maybe hit 140 to $170 million. If all that plays out that way, we're looking at yet another potential $100 million loss for Blue Beetle. People can try to spin a $12 million second weekend any way they can. Oh, the 4th best hold on National Cinema Day off of one of the worst openings we've ever seen in history. But in reality this is one of the worst second weekends that DC has ever seen, and that Blue Beetle is expected to be another $100 million loss for this company. There's a lot of people that are promoting this and defending it just solely based on the identity politics involved. But unfortunately, the reality is it's yet another failure for DC, the 7th financial failure in a row when it comes to these things in the DCEU. Obviously, Joker and Batman take place outside of that continuity. Those are the only movies they've had success with over the last several years, and Blue Beetle is just continuing this disastrous trend for the DCEU.